The stars had always been cold and silent, but on this day they felt colder than ever before. Admiral Catherine Cole stood alone on the bridge of her ship, Durance, watching a transmission that had already broken her heart 5 times over. The colony world of New Eden filled the screen, or what was left of it. Smoke rose from burning cities. Craters marked places where schools and hospitals had once stood. 40 million people had lived there just 1 week ago. Now there was nothing but ash and silence. Catherine had served in the Terran fleet for 30 years. She had seen death before. She had lost friends in border skirmishes and rescue operations gone wrong. But this was different. This was not a battle. This was murder on a scale that made her hands shake with rage. The Vrekari Dominion had arrived without warning. Their ships had descended on New Eden like a swarm of locusts, burning everything in their path. The colonists had no warships, no heavy weapons, nothing but farming equipment and mining tools. They had sent distress signals for 3 days straight, begging for help that never came. Then the signals stopped, and the only sound from New Eden was the crackle of flames consuming the dead. Commander Lucas Webb entered the bridge, his face pale and drawn. He had not slept in days, and the weight of what he was about to say pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. "The Galactic Council has released their official statement," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine turned to face him. "And they're calling it an unfortunate incident. The Vrekari claim our colonists crossed into their territorial buffer zone. The Council has accepted this explanation and voted to take no military action." For a long moment, Catherine said nothing. She simply stared at Lucas as if he had spoken in a language she could not understand. 40 million dead, and the galaxy's response was a shrug and a statement of condolence. "How did the vote go?" she finally asked. 11-1. "We were the only ones who voted for action against the Vrekari." Catherine turned back to the view screen, where New Eden continued to burn in silence. She thought about the family she had known there. She thought about the children who had waved at her ship during their last supply run, their faces bright with wonder at the great vessel passing overhead. All of them were gone now, reduced to nothing, because the galaxy did not consider human lives worth protecting. On Earth, Ambassador Daniel Marsh had spent 2 weeks in the council chambers on Nexus Prime, fighting for justice that would never come. He had presented evidence that filled 300 data files. He had shown orbital footage of the Vrekari attack, of ships firing on civilian transports trying to flee, of soldiers executing survivors in the streets. He had played the distress calls, the voices of mothers pleading for someone to save their children. The Threllian delegate had checked his communication device during the testimony. The Kasari representative had left early for a dinner engagement. The Varani ambassador had suggested that perhaps the colonists had provoked the attack somehow, when the vote was called. Daniel had watched 11 hands rise against humanity's plea for justice. He had returned to Earth the next day and submitted his resignation before the sun set. President. Maria Gutierrez received the news in her private office, surrounded by reports that painted a picture of galactic indifference. For 300 years, humanity had served as the galaxy's peacekeepers. When the Terran Alliance first made contact with the Galactic Council, they had been welcomed as useful tools, nothing more. Humans were patient. Humans were willing to sacrifice. Humans would go where other species refused to go and do what other species refused to do. And now, when humanity asked for justice, the galaxy had turned its back. Maria spent 3 days preparing her address to the United Terran Congress. She wrote and rewrote every word, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. When she finally stepped up to the podium, her face was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. "For 3 centuries," she began, her voice carried to every human world through the vastness of space, "we have been the galaxy's peacekeepers. We have mediated their conflicts. We have protected their shipping lanes. We have shed our blood to maintain their order. We have buried our children so that others might live in safety." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled representatives. Last month, 40 million of our people were murdered on New Eden. They were farmers and teachers, doctors and engineers, parents and children. They were human beings, and they were slaughtered without mercy by the Verikar Dominion. The chamber was absolutely silent. We asked the Galactic Council for justice. We presented evidence of genocide. We pleaded for action against those who murdered our people. And do you know what the council said? Maria's hands gripped the podium. They told us it was an unfortunate incident. They told us to accept our loss and move on. They told us, in every way that mattered, that human lives are not worth protecting. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin. The Galactic Council has made their position clear. Very well, we will make ours equally clear. Effective immediately, the Terran Alliance withdraws from all peacekeeping operations. We recall our fleets from Council space. We withdraw our diplomats, our aid workers, our medical personnel. We withdraw every hand we have ever extended in service to species who consider us expendable. Across the galaxy, the transmission played on view screens in council chambers and government offices. The Thralians watched with confusion. The Kasari assumed it was a bluff. The Varani laughed and said the humans would come crawling back within a month. If the galaxy wishes to treat humanity as disposable, President Gutierrez continued, then the galaxy can learn to survive without us. We did not ask for much. We asked for justice. We asked for the basic acknowledgement that our lives have value. We were denied both. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze reaching across light years to every corner of known space. To the Galactic Council I say this: you have made your choice. Now live with the consequences. To the Vriakari Dominion I say this: enjoy your victory while it lasts. Humanity has long memories, and we do not forget those who murder our children. She stepped back from the podium. To my fellow humans I say this: come home. All of you. Leave their stations and their outposts and their patrol routes. Let the galaxy see what happens when humanity is no longer there to hold back the darkness. The transmission ended. Within hours, human ships across the galaxy began powering up their engines. Patrol vessels abandoned their posts. Medical frigates departed from stations they had staffed for generations. Diplomats packed their bags and booked passage home. Admiral Catherine Cole received her orders aboard the Endurance. She read them twice, then looked out at the stars that humanity had protected for 300 years. Set course for Earth, she said quietly. We're going home. As the Endurance turned away from the borders it had guarded for so long, Catherine allowed herself one final look at the darkness they were leaving behind. Good luck, she whispered to the galaxy. You're going to need it. The ship jumped to faster than light speed, and the stars streaked past like tears falling from heaven. The first month after humanity's withdrawal was quiet. The Galactic Council continued its business as usual, passing resolutions and debating trade agreements as if nothing had changed. The Thralian hegemony assured everyone that their own naval forces would easily fill the gap left by human peacekeepers. The Kasari Trade Federation calculated that commerce would continue without interruption. The Varani Collective predicted that the humans would realize their mistake and return within 30 days, begging to be useful again. None of them understood what they had lost. Ambassador Cathora of the Thralian hegemony was the first to sound the alarm. He burst into an emergency council session 6 weeks after humanity's departure, his normally composed face twisted with fear and anger. His robes were wrinkled, as if he had dressed in a hurry, and his voice cracked as he demanded to speak. We have lost 12 merchant convoys in the past 3 weeks, he announced to the assembled delegates. 12. Pirates have taken control of the Karate shipping lanes. Our own patrol ships are spread too thin to respond. Where are the human patrol vessels? Gone, replied the council speaker, an ancient Thralian whose face betrayed no emotion, as they said they would be. We need them back. This is unacceptable. Perhaps you should have considered that before voting against their request for justice. Cathvara sputtered in outrage. But he had no answer. The problem spread like fire through dry grass. The shipping lanes that humanity had patrolled for 300 years became hunting grounds for pirates and raiders who had hidden in the dark spaces between stars. Waiting for exactly this moment, they struck without warning and disappeared before any response could arrive. Cargo ships were plundered. Passenger vessels vanished without trace. Insurance rates tripled. then tripled again. On the mining world of Tessera 7, the Kessari faced a crisis they had suppressed for decades. The workers in the deep mines had long complained of dangerous conditions and unfair treatment. For years, human mediators had maintained an uneasy peace, negotiating small improvements that kept the workers from outright rebellion. Without those mediators, tension that had built up over generations finally exploded. The uprising began in mine, Shaft 17, and spread across the planet within hours. Workers seized control of processing facilities and communications arrays. The Kessari security forces responded with brutal force, and what had been a labor dispute became a civil war. Blood flowed through tunnels that had been dug by generations of suffering hands. Chancellor Voss of the Kessari Trade Federation watched the reports from his office on the capital world, his four-fingered hands trembling as he scrolled through casualty figures that grew larger by the hour. "Contact the humans," he ordered his aide. "Offer them whatever they want. We need their mediators." The aide returned an hour later, his face pale. "They declined, Chancellor. They said they are too busy mourning their dead to concern themselves with our internal affairs." "That's it? That's all they said?" "They also sent their formal condolences." The Varani Collective discovered the true cost of humanity's absence in the most painful way possible. For 80 years, human diplomats had carefully maintained a fragile peace treaty between the Varani and their ancestral enemies. Their Dracathi. The two species had fought 17 wars over the course of their history, each more devastating than the last. Only the patient work of human negotiators had kept them from an 18th. 3 months after humanity withdrew, a Varani patrol ship fired on a Dracathi vessel near the disputed border zone. The Dracathi response was swift and overwhelming. Within a week, the border region was ablaze with the fires of war that human diplomats had prevented for nearly a century. High Counselor Marin of the Varani stared at the tactical display in her war room, watching her fleet engage the Dracathi in battle after battle. They were losing. They had forgotten how to fight a real war, had grown soft during the decades of human-brokered peace. How did the humans do it? She asked her military advisor. How did they keep the Dracathi in check for so long? "They talked to them," the advisor replied. "They listened. They found common ground and built trust over years of patient negotiation. Can we do that?" "No, High Counselor. We have forgotten how." Captain Nathan Reyes observed the growing chaos from Orbital Station Sentinel, which had been repositioned to maintain watch over the scarred remains of New Eden. He had spent 15 years protecting Council shipping lanes, risking his life to keep species safe, who now refused to acknowledge that his people had ever mattered. His crew had decorated the observation deck with photographs of New Eden before the attack. Smiling faces looked out from every surface, families and friends who would never smile again. Nathan came here every evening to remember what had been lost and why they had left the galaxy to its fate. Message from the Threlian hegemony. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Hannah Price, entering the observation deck with a datapad in her hand. "They're requesting temporary humanitarian assistance in securing their trade routes. They're calling it an emergency." Nathan almost laughed. Humanitarian assistance. That's what they're calling it. How should I respond? Tell them we're occupied with our own concerns at the moment. And Hannah? Include our sincere condolences for their difficulties. Hannah nodded and left to compose the response. The Galactic Council convened an emergency summit on Nexus Prime, hoping to address the cascade of crises that threatened to overwhelm them all. 12 species gathered in the Great Chamber, where decisions affecting trillions of lives had been made for millennia. They argued and accused and blamed each other for the disasters. Unfolding across known space, the Thralians demanded that the Kizari take responsibility for not supporting stronger action against the Vrekari. The Kizari insisted that the Varani had started the current crisis by provoking the Dracathi. The Varani accused everyone else of abandoning them in their hour of need. Without a human moderator to guide the discussion, the summit descended into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other in languages that the translation system struggled to process. Accusations flew like weapons. Old grudges resurfaced with new venom. The summit ended after 9 days, with no resolution, no plan, and no hope. On Earth, President Maria Gutierrez watched the reports from across the galaxy with a mixture of grim satisfaction and deep sadness. She had not wanted this. She had wanted justice, acknowledgement, the simple recognition that human lives had value. Instead, she had been forced to teach the galaxy a lesson it should never have needed to learn. "They're falling apart faster than our projections estimated," said Admiral Cole, who had become one of the president's closest advisors since returning from the frontier. "Another 3 months at this rate, and the council may collapse entirely." "I know," Maria replied, "and I find that I cannot bring myself to care. What happens when they finally realize they need us?" Maria turned to look out her window at the blue sky of Earth, the world that had given birth to a species the galaxy had taken for granted for far too long. "Then they will have to ask nicely," she said, "and even then, we may say no." Somewhere in the darkness of space, the Vericar Dominion watched the chaos they had helped create. Their leaders smiled and made plans for expansion, confident that no one would stop them now. They did not yet understand that humanity's silence was not surrender. It was preparation. 6 months had passed since humanity withdrew from the galaxy, and the carefully built order of centuries had crumbled into dust. Trade routes that had once carried goods safely across vast distances now sat empty, too dangerous for any ship without heavy escort. Border conflicts that human peacekeepers had contained for generations now burned like wildfires, consuming worlds and lives without end. The Galactic Council, which had once governed with calm authority, now met in sessions filled with fear and recrimination. And then the Vericar made their second mistake. The Vericar Dominion had watched the chaos with growing confidence. They had murdered 40 million humans and faced no consequences. They had destabilized an entire galactic region simply by existing as a threat that no one would confront. Now, with human peacekeepers gone and the council species fighting among themselves, the Veracari saw an opportunity that was too tempting to resist. Their invasion fleet struck the Thurelian border world of Keth, its prime without warning or declaration of war. 200 warships descended on a planet that had never seen combat, overwhelming its orbital defenses in less than 3 hours. By nightfall, Vereka soldiers were marching through the streets of cities that had known only peace for 500 years. Ambassador Kethvora received the news while preparing for another fruitless council session. His aide burst into his quarters with tears streaming down his face, babbling about fire falling from the sky and family members who had stopped responding to communications. "Keth Prime has fallen," the aide managed to say between sobs. "The Verkari have taken it. They're executing government officials in the public squares." Kethvara felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Keth Prime was his homeworld. His parents lived there, his siblings, his children. He tried to reach them through every communication channel available, but there was only silence. The emergency council session that followed was unlike any in living memory. Kethvara stood before the assembled delegates, his voice raw with grief and rage, demanding action that should have been taken a year ago. "The Verkari have invaded council space," he shouted, slamming his fist on the podium. "This is not a border skirmish or an unfortunate incident. This is an act of war against the council itself. We must respond with overwhelming force." "With what forces?" asked the Kasari chancellor, his voice tired and defeated. "Our military ships are scattered across a dozen conflict zones. We cannot gather enough strength to challenge the Verkari without leaving our other territories defenseless. Then we must recall the humans. They have the ships. They have the experience. They can help us." The council speaker shook his head slowly. "The humans have made their position very clear. They will not fight our battles for us anymore." "Then we must beg," Kethvora said, and there was no pride left in his voice, only desperation. "We must go to Earth and beg them to save us." A delegation was assembled within days, led by Kethvora himself. 7 ships carrying representatives from each major council species made the journey to Earth, a world that most of them had never bothered to visit during the centuries of human service to the galaxy. What they found when they arrived shocked them to their core. The Earth they remembered was a peaceful world, home to patient diplomats and gentle scholars who had dedicated their lives to serving others. The Earth they found was something entirely different. Orbital shipyards that had once produced cargo vessels and medical frigates now churned out warships at a pace that seemed impossible. Military academies that had trained peacekeepers now trained soldiers for a kind of warfare the galaxy had not seen in generations, Captain. Nathan Reyes was among the officers who escorted the delegation. From their landing site to the presidential palace, he wore a new uniform, darker and more severe than the light blue of the old peacekeeping service. The weapon at his hip was not a ceremonial blade but a combat pistol, loaded and ready. "Your world has changed," Kethvora observed as they walked through streets lined with soldiers in training. "It has. Is all this because of New Eden?" Nathan stopped walking and turned to face the Thralian ambassador. His eyes held no warmth, no forgiveness, only a cold determination that made Kethvora step back involuntarily. 40 million people died on New Eden, Nathan said quietly. 40 million. And when we asked for justice, you called it an unfortunate incident. You told us to accept our loss and move on. Did you really think we would simply forget? The delegation was received by President Maria Gutierrez in the Great Hall of the Presidential Palace. She sat behind a desk that had been used by human leaders for centuries. Flanked by Admiral Catherine Cole and a dozen other officers in the new dark uniforms, she did not rise to greet them. Kethvora approached the desk and lowered himself to his knees, a gesture of submission that no Thralian had made to another species in 1,000 years. "We come to beg," he said, his voice trembling. "The Varekari have invaded our space. They have taken Keth Prime, and they will not stop there. We cannot defeat them alone. We need your help." President Gutierrez studied him for a long moment before speaking. "A year ago, the Varekari murdered 40 million of our people. We came to the council and begged for help. Do you remember what you said?" Kethvora closed his eyes. "I remember. You said it was an unfortunate incident. You said our colonists had probably provoked the attack. You said the matter did not warrant military action. We were wrong. I know this now. We were terribly, terribly wrong, yes? You were." Maria stood and walked around the desk to stand before the kneeling ambassador. The other delegates watched in silence, afraid to speak or move. "The Varekari have invaded council space," she said. "By your own laws, by the treaties you yourselves wrote, this requires a military response from the council. Send your fleets. Defend your territory. Fight your own war." "We cannot," Kethvora whispered. "We have relied on human protection for too long. We have forgotten how to fight. Our ships are outdated. Our soldiers are untrained. If we face the Varekari alone, we will be destroyed." "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you decided that human lives were worthless." The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. "Please," Kethvora begged. "I know we do not deserve your help. I know we have given you every reason to hate us. But there are billions of innocent people in council space who will die if the Varekari are not stopped. Children who had no part in the decisions we made. Families who only want to live in peace." President Gutierrez was silent for a very long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold as the void between stars. "A year ago, there were children on New Eden who wanted to live in peace. There were families who had committed no crime except being human in a galaxy that did not value their lives. They're all dead now, Ambassador. Every single one of them." She returned to her seat behind the desk. "Go back to your council. Tell them that humanity will not fight their war for them. Tell them that we did not spend the last year building this military to clean up their mess. We built it for our own purposes, and we will use it when we are ready. And when will that be?" Maria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "When we decide that the time for justice has finally come." The delegation returned to council space empty-handed, carrying nothing but fear and the knowledge that they had brought this catastrophe upon themselves. 1 year to the day after the massacre of New Eden, the Terran Alliance declared war on the Varekari Dominion. There was no negotiation, no diplomatic exchange, no attempt at peaceful resolution. President Maria Gutierrez addressed the galaxy with a simple statement that lasted less than 2 minutes. Humanity had waited long enough. Justice would now be delivered by fire and steel. Admiral Catherine Cole commanded the first expeditionary fleet from the bridge of her new flagship, the Reckoning. It was a name she had chosen herself, a promise carved into the hull of the most powerful warship humanity had ever built. 73 vessels followed in formation behind her, each one crewed by men and women who had volunteered knowing they might never return home. All ships report ready. Admiral, said Commander Lucas Webb from his station at the tactical console. The fleet is prepared to translate on your command. Catherine looked out at the stars one last time, thinking of the 40 million ghosts who would travel with them into battle. She thought of the children of New Eden who would never grow up, the families who would never be reunited, the dreams that had been burned to ash by Vakari weapons. All ships. This is Admiral Cole, she said into the fleet-wide communication channel. 1 year ago, the Vakari Dominion murdered our people, and the galaxy told us to accept it. They told us to be good peacekeepers, to swallow our grief, to move on. They were wrong about us. Today we show them what happens when humanity stops being peaceful. She paused, letting her words reach every ship in the fleet. We are not going to Vakari space to negotiate. We are not going to issue warnings or demands or ultimatums. We are going to war, and we are going to win. For New Eden. For New Eden, the response came back from 73 ships. Thousands of voices speaking as one. Translate, Catherine ordered. The stars stretched and blurred as the fleet jumped faster than light speed. Crossing the vast distance to Vakari space in the blink of an eye, the Vakari had studied human tactics for decades. They knew how human peacekeepers operated, with measured responses and proportional force, always seeking to minimize casualties and preserve life wherever possible. They had built their defensive strategies around these expectations. Confident that humans would behave the way they always had, they were catastrophically wrong. The first expeditionary fleet emerged from translation directly above the Vriker shipyards at Draven Station, one of the largest military production facilities in the Dominion. There were no warnings broadcast, no demands for surrender, no pause for negotiation. Human weapons opened fire before the Vakari defenders even understood what was happening. Commander. Lucas Webb coordinated the assault with cold precision. Target the dry docks first. Remove their ability to build new ships. Then the fuel depots. Then the command structure. Leave nothing standing. Captain Nathan Reyes led the marine assault on the station itself. His team breached the outer hull in 3 places simultaneously, overwhelming the defenders before they could organize a response. The fighting was brutal and short. Human soldiers who had trained for a year in the arts of war met Vakari troops who had never faced a truly determined enemy. Station secured, Nathan reported to Admiral Cole after 2 hours of combat. All shipyard facilities have been destroyed. Enemy military personnel have been eliminated. Proceed to secondary targets. Galactic Council watched in horrified fascination as humanity demonstrated what they had been building during their year of silence. Human fleets struck Vakari military installations across the Dominion, appearing without warning and leaving destruction in their wake. There was no pattern the Vakari commanders could predict, no safe harbor they could rely upon. Supply lines that had fed the Vakari war machine for centuries were cut within weeks. Communication networks went dark as human ships destroyed relay stations faster than they could be replaced. Military bases that had stood for generations fell one after another, their defenders outmatched by soldiers who fought with a fury that seemed beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Khazari.
Ow.
Chancellor watched a tactical display of the invasion with his military advisors, tracking the advance of human forces deep into Vakari territory. How is this possible? He asked. The humans were peacekeepers. They specialized in negotiation and mediation. Where did they learn to wage war like this? His senior general shook his head slowly. They were always capable of this, Chancellor. They simply chose not to be. For 300 years, they chose peace because they believed in building a better galaxy. We taught them that belief was foolish. What have we done? We awakened something that should have been left sleeping. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council convened to debate humanity's war against the Vrekari. The Thralian delegation demanded that the Council condemn human aggression and impose sanctions. The Kasari argued that interference would only make things worse. The Vareni suggested that perhaps it was best to simply stay out of the way. The humans are committing atrocities, Ambassador Kethvora insisted. They are destroying military and civilian targets without distinction. They are taking no prisoners. This is not justice. It is revenge. The Drekathai representative rose to speak for the first time in decades. His species had remained silent through most council deliberations, nursing their own grudges and waiting for their moment. Now he looked around the chamber with contempt in his ancient eyes. "You want to condemn the humans?" he asked. "The same humans who kept peace in this galaxy for 300 years? The same humans who sacrificed their own children to protect species who did not deserve their loyalty?" He walked to the center of the chamber, his voice rising with each word. "The Vrekari murdered 40 million human civilians. 40 million. And this council told humanity to accept it. You told them their lives did not matter. You told them justice was too inconvenient." His gaze swept across the assembled delegates. "Now the humans are doing what we should have done a year ago. They are destroying a threat that we were too cowardly to confront. They are protecting the galaxy from an enemy that has Vin, it will attack anyone who appears weak, and you wish to condemn them for it." The chamber was silent. "I move that this council formally acknowledge its failure to protect New Eden. I move that we recognize our own complicity in the deaths of 40 million innocent people. I move that we thank humanity for doing what we refused to do." The vote was called. 7 species voted in favor of the motion. For abstained, 1 voted against. The motion passed. Captain Nathan Reyes led the assault on the Vrekari, Homeworld's orbital defense network 8 months into the war. His ship punched through the enemy lines with weapons blazing, supported by squadrons of fighters that darted through the chaos like angry wasps. Vrekari defense platforms exploded around him, their crews dying before they could fire a single shot in response. Defense grid at 60%, Hannah reported from her station. 40%. 20. Defense grid eliminated. Nathan looked down at the Vrekari homeworld, a green and blue sphere that looked peaceful from orbit. Somewhere down there, the leaders who had ordered the destruction of New Eden were hiding. Waiting to see if their defenses would hold, they would not hold. "This is for the children," Nathan said quietly as his ship descended toward the atmosphere. "This is for the families. This is for every single person you murdered because you thought no one would stop you." Behind him, the human fleet took up position in orbit, surrounding the Vrekari homeworld like a fist closing around a throat. Admiral Catherine Cole broadcast a single message to the planet below. "Your military is destroyed. Your defenses are eliminated. Your allies have abandoned you. Surrender now or face the consequences." For the first time in their history, the Vrekari knew what it felt like to be helpless before an enemy who would show no mercy. It felt like justice. The Vrekari. Dominion surrendered after 14 months of total war. Their military capacity had been shattered beyond any hope of recovery. Their leadership had been systematically hunted down and eliminated. Their empire, which had terrorized the galactic rim for centuries, simply ceased to exist as a functioning power. Admiral Catherine Cole accepted the formal surrender aboard the Reckoning. Orbiting the Vrekari homeworld that human forces now controlled completely, the Vrekari's supreme commander knelt before her, his once proud bearing reduced to trembling fear. He had seen what human soldiers did to those who resisted. He had watched his civilization crumble while the galaxy did nothing to help. "What will happen to us now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine looked down at him with eyes that held no sympathy. "That is not my decision to make. I am a soldier. My duty was to end this war, and I have done so. The politicians will determine your fate. Will there be mercy? Did you show mercy to the 40 million people you murdered on New Eden? Did you spare the children when they begged for their lives? Did you listen when mothers screamed for you to stop?" The Supreme Commander had no answer. "I thought not." Catherine turned away from him and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that humanity had fought so hard to protect. The war was over, but she felt no joy in their victory. Too many good people had died on both sides. Too much had been destroyed that could never be rebuilt. "Take him away," she said to the guards. "He will face trial for his crimes, as will all the others." Humanity does not execute prisoners without judgment, even prisoners who deserve no judgment at all. On Earth, President Maria Gutierrez prepared for the most important diplomatic mission of her life. She would address the Galactic Council, not as a supplicant begging for justice, but as the leader of a species that had proven itself capable of reshaping the galaxy through force of arms. The council chamber on Nexus Prime was silent as she entered. 12 species watched her walk to the central podium, their faces showing various mixtures of fear, respect, and lingering shame. Many of them had voted against humanity's plea for help just 2 years ago. Now they waited to hear what the victorious humans would demand. Maria stood at the podium for a long moment before speaking, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "We did not want this war," she finally began. "We wanted peace. We wanted to continue serving the galaxy as we had for 300 years, building bridges between species and preventing conflicts before they could begin. We wanted justice for our murdered people. An acknowledgement that human lives have value equal to any other species in this council." She paused, her gaze moving across the assembled delegates. "When we asked for these things, we were denied. 40 million dead were dismissed as an unfortunate incident. Our grief was called an inconvenience. Our request for action was rejected by a vote of 11 to 1. Several delegates looked away, unable to meet her eyes. So we withdrew. We came home and we built a military that could protect our people without relying on the goodwill of species, who had proven their goodwill was worthless. We watched as the galaxy descended into chaos without human peacekeepers to maintain order. We watched as the Varakar, emboldened by their unpunished crime, attacked Council space itself." Maria leaned forward, her voice hardening. "And then we went to war. Not for the Council. Not for the species who had abandoned us in our hour of need. We went to war for New Eden. For the 40 million people who died because no one thought their lives were worth protecting." She straightened and took a deep breath. "The war is over. The Vakari Dominion no longer exists as a military power. Their leaders will face trial for genocide, and those found guilty will be punished according to the severity of their crimes. This is the justice we sought 2 years ago, delivered by our own hands, because no one else would deliver it for us." "What do you want now?" the council speaker asked, his voice trembling slightly. "A new treaty? A new compact between humanity and the Galactic Council. One that recognizes us not as servants or peacekeepers, but as equal partners in governing this galaxy. One that establishes clear consequences for attacks on any member species, so that no civilization will ever again be told to accept the murder of their people as an unfortunate incident." The debate that followed lasted for 6 days. Some delegates argued that humanity was demanding too much. Others pointed out that humanity had earned the right to demand whatever they wanted. In the end, the new compact passed with unanimous support. Ambassador Daniel Marsh was recalled from retirement to sign the treaty on humanity's behalf. He had resigned in disgust after the council rejected his plea for justice. Now he returned to place his name on a document that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. As he signed, he thought of his friends on New Eden, who would never see this moment. He thought of the children who had died in fire because the galaxy considered human lives expendable. "This changes nothing for the dead," he said quietly to Admiral Cole, who had accompanied him to the ceremony. "No," she agreed. "But it ensures that no one else will have to die because the galaxy forgot that we matter." Captain Nathan Reyes returned to New Eden 1 year after the war ended. The planet was still scarred from the Varakar attack, still silent in most places, still bearing the wounds of genocide. But construction drones had begun their work. Foundations were being laid for new cities. A memorial was taking shape on the horizon, a towering spire that would eventually bear the names of all 40 million victims. Lieutenant Hannah Price stood beside him as they watched. The sunset paint the ash-covered plains in shades of orange and gold. Calling it New Eden Reborn, she said, "The first colonists arrive next month. Families who want to build something from the ashes." Nathan nodded slowly. "Good. Do you think people will remember? 100 years from now? 1,000. He looked at the memorial spire rising against the darkening sky. It would be visible from orbit when it was completed, a beacon reminding every ship that passed this world of what had been lost and what had been avenged. "They'll remember," he said. "And if they ever start to forget, the galaxy will remind them." Far above, a human patrol fleet maintained its eternal vigil. These were not peacekeepers in the old sense, gentle souls who sought only to build bridges and heal wounds. These were guardians, warriors, who had learned the hardest lesson the galaxy could teach. Peace was precious. Peace was worth fighting for. But peace, built on the assumption that some lives did not matter, was no peace at all. The galaxy had called humanity the great peacekeepers for 300 years. They had been wrong. Humanity was not peaceful by nature. They were peaceful by choice, because they believed in building something better than endless war. When that choice was taken from them, when their people were murdered and their grief was dismissed, humanity remembered what they had been before they chose peace. They remembered that their ancestors had survived ice ages and famines, plagues and wars, extinction events that had wiped out lesser species. They remembered that they came from the world where only the strong and the clever and the determined could survive, and they showed the galaxy. What happened when the peacemakers became warriors? The stars continued their ancient dance, cold and silent and eternal. But now, scattered among them, human ships kept watch over a galaxy that had finally learned the truth. Humanity had never been tame. They had simply been patient, and patience, once exhausted, gave way to something far more terrible than any species had ever imagined.